How does the United Methodist Church make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? By repeating that story 10,000 times, 10 million times around the world. In Spanish and English and Korean, in every language you can imagine, on every continent that you can name. That's your ministry. And sometimes your congregation has the extraordinary gift and privilege of having 35 years to work on somebody. Or we could change the wording, God has 35 years to work through your congregation on somebody. And sometimes you have 5 years. And sometimes you have 5 months. And sometimes you have one worship service. And that's why it matters that we offer our utmost and highest every time. You know. It's congregation, silly. and that means that at every level of the church we ought to be thinking about how do we start new congregations? What are the, when I started ministry there was 1 or 2 models for starting new congregations. Now there's 15, 17. We can't name them all. We ought to be experimenting with all of them. This means that we ought to be attending to what is the quality of our worship services, and is this, the Towers Watson describes this crisis of relevance in the church. And boy, is that right? Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Your church is made up of these concentric circles. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. And in the middle, it's you, I hope, and some of your key leaders who kind of know everything that's going on in the church, right? And then you got maybe your chair members of different committees and your administrative council, and then the members of all those other committees. Then you have all your volunteers and Sunday school teachers and ushers and people that make the church run. And then you've got your members who attend, and maybe your members who attend a little bit less than that. You've got all these concentric circles, right? Where is the mission of the church fulfilled? The mission of the church happens at the margins of where those who are part of your congregation engage those who are outside your congregation. That's where your mission and justice ministry is fulfilled, and that's where your evangelistic mission is fulfilled. It's where those who are followers of Christ engage those who are not followers of Christ. And so part of the very role of leadership that is given to you as a pastor is to constantly redirect the energy toward the margins of the congregation. To make sure that this wall is permeable so that people are walking across, they're stepping into the body of Christ. Are you with me on this? Okay? So, what happens here in the middle? That's where all your church meetings are. But your ministry is not fulfilled, the mission of the church is not fulfilled at your meetings. At best, your meetings are strategies about how to fulfill the mission out there. But now, when we talk about a crisis of relevance, I don't know where you buy your coffee, whether it's from the 22-year-old tattooed young woman at Starbucks, or whether it's the 30-year-old assistant manager at McDonald's who's trying to just keep his family alive, or whether it's the 35-year-old single mom waitress at Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know where you buy your coffee. But whoever you buy it from, do you think they give a flip about what's going on right in here? Go sometime, Starbucks, you say, let me tell you about my administrative board meeting last night. Better yet, let me tell you about General Conference. May I show you, I don't know, have you ever had a chance, ma'am, to read the Book of Discipline? Here's the funny thing. When I draw this, people get it, right? That's where, so role of leadership, force future-oriented thinking, and maintain an outward focus. I mean, that just makes sense, right? Now let me draw you a picture of the United Methodist Church, the denomination. I don't know, who do you put in the center? It gets a little nebulous, but General Conference, maybe council of bishops, I don't know, general boards, well, maybe the general boards are here, and then annual conferences and annual conference, maybe annual conference staff and structures here, and then annual conference meetings here, and then congregation. So, you know where I'm going with this diagram? That what responsible leadership needs to look like in the church is drawing the energy toward where the mission is fulfilled, which in this case is congregations, faith communities. Does it feel like that? Does it feel like all the energy of this is directed out there? What does it feel like? Gravitational pull. There was another name for that I gave you earlier. The giant hairball. Just imagine, well, I'm running out of time. Congregational excellence. I just would say that it's about congregations, silly, that we've got to take seriously that notion that we've got to figure out how to increase the number of vital congregations, and that's just absolutely critical. And friends, I'm not one of those people that goes around, slamming general boards and everything. I don't think they're doing what we ask them to do for the most part. But it's just that what they're being asked to do, many of them, is something different now. We need to be asking something different now than what we did in the past, and because everything has changed. But the general boards are fully owned subsidiaries of local congregations, and they can only be as healthy as the congregations upon which they depend for their resources and personnel. There is a dependent relationship between congregations and general boards, but it's not that you are dependent upon them, it's that they are dependent upon you. And the same way with all of this in the center, right? And so we've really got to figure out how to draw that energy toward where the mission is. The fourth of these, if back here was it's the congregation, silly, I'd want to add another fourth one that says it's it's pastoral leadership, silly. Because those two together, increasing the number of vital congregations and increasing the leadership capacities of our pastors, are the absolute two critical things that must be done with excellence in an annual conference, or that annual conference will eventually fail in its mission. We must figure out how to start new congregations, strengthen congregations, intercede in congregations, help them move quickly to a timely death if they are broken or dying. So one element of this is congregations. The other element is clergy leadership. That is, how do we develop a culture, the call, how do we recruit, how do we develop, how do we train and educate, how do we continue to evaluate, how do we create sustaining systems for clergy growth and learning, how do we remove people if there's a reason to do that. And those clergy systems actually is number 2 in the call to action report from Towers-Watson, is we've got to reform our clergy systems. Now, when I say reform our clergy systems, all kinds of bells go off in the room about, well, what does that mean? And I have just a few ways of describing this, but actually I have a whole lot of ways of describing this. But one of those things is we've got to change the default of our district committees and our boards of ordained ministry from a default of, if you have met all the requirements and have done nothing egregious, you will be approved, to a default of, you will likely not be approved unless you show extraordinary promise and giftedness for ministry. There are several things going on with our clergy systems. Part of it is our whole clergy recruitment, that whole diagram, if I were to kind of chart that out of call, recruitment, candidacy, local church involvement, district committee, local pastors licensing school, and that path, or ordination, or seminary and that path, and then Board of Ordained Ministry and provisional relationship and all. You see, I've been doing this for how many years, and I still got to think about all those little steps. Part of it is that is such a complex system that it itself is not serving us well. It's not serving this day and age. And now, do I have the answer to it? Sure, just ask. No, I don't. But I know that what we've got now is not serving us well. And some of it is the system itself is too complex. I served on the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry back a couple of quadrennia ago, and I remember when the staff presented to the board their new, was it CD or DVD or whatever it was that they were going to send to all the annual conference boards of ordained ministry, and the title of it was How to Navigate the Ordination Process. And I thought, if that is if that has to be your title, something's wrong with the complexity of it. So one part is the complexity, the many steps, the confusion, the fact that if you go to this superintendent, you hear one thing, if you go to that superintendent, you hear something else. The fact that it is so complex, there are so many streams and so many steps and everything like that. But the other part of our system has to do with how we credential people, and it has to do with that decision making that I mentioned before, that it is simply not enough to have you done all your paperwork and handed everything in and we've checked all the boxes off, and now we're going to basically give you life tenure in a position, whether the church has a place for you or not. And so we've got things to work on. This is the way I describe our clergy system sometime. And this is what it feels like to be a bishop. So maybe boards of ordained ministry or cabinets are aware of this, but let me just throw this out. Imagine that you are the head of a history department and at a university, and 3 professors are retiring. Long tenured professors are retiring, and so you look at this. You look at enrollment in history classes for a while, and you say, well, that and plus the budget, there's less money and that kind of thing. We probably ought to be looking for 2 people instead of 3. You with me? Okay. So you sit down and you figure out what are the criteria. They got to have a PhD. They got to have teaching experience. They got to have published something. They have to have nothing egregious in their background. Good recommendations. And so you send all this criteria over to some kind of personnel or human resource center, and they start the search. And they use that criteria. And they come back 10 weeks later and they say, you're going to be so pleased because 15 people applied for that position, and 12 of them met those criteria of publication and PhD and stuff. 2 of them, upon interviews, we discovered that there was something just concerning in their background. And so that left us with 10 candidates, and we have offered tenured positions in your history department for all 10 of those. Did you know there's no connection between the Board of Ordained Ministry and who and how they credential and what the mission field needs are as seen by the cabinet? And some conferences have a very good, close working relationship, and so that kind of stays in conversation. But many of our conferences, those are entirely separate. And so when I make appointments in the Missouri Conference, there are years when we assess everything at February and realize there are 27 more people than there are full-time positions in the Missouri Conference. Well, I could go on with other things there in terms of I do think we've got to take seriously the reforming of clergy systems, and some of it is about judgment and discernment and changing that default, and others of it is systemic. Is just how do we get the left hand to know what the right hand's doing? How do we prepare for the mission of the church in the future? Our biggest pressure in Missouri or out of 870 congregations, 20% of our attendance is in 14 congregations, and 20% of our attendance is in 554 congregations. And those 554 congregations, which are small congregations then, is each year we just see more and more move from full-time to part-time, and thereby save themselves not $5,000 or $10,000, but $20,000 or $30,000 because of how it changes the whole benefit thing. And that means that what we need going forward is going to be a different mix of ministry than what we've had in the past. And that's just very challenging. And so it's pastoral leadership. We've got to cultivate a culture of learning in our clergy. That's just so important. We've got to develop support systems that help people just navigate the changes around them and all that's going on in ministry right now. We've got to change our system of appointment making to make it more mission field appointment. You know what I mean by mission field appointment? We've pushed this to the max in our conference, and other conferences do it to varying degrees. And but what it means, and I don't know, maybe this isn't the right audience to say this to, but we talked about it openly in the Missouri conference. But it means that why a person is appointed to a certain position may have very little to do with his or her age, how many years he or she has been in ministry, gender, ethnicity, or any of a number of other things. It's going to have to do with the expected promise of them reaching the mission field where that church is located. Okay? It's about the mission. The mission of the church comes first. And this messes up tenure-based appointment systems. This messes up the whole declension sheet kind of thinking. And but I think it's absolutely essential. This mission field appointment thinking, Janice Huey describes it best. She says that when she became a bishop, she realized in the first couple of years, I mean, now looking back on it, that she realized that in the first couple of years, when she was making appointments, like right there in the cabinet room, she was imagining in her mind how that pastor would receive the news of that appointment. Would she or he be delighted, pleased, disappointed, satisfied? It's like pastors come first, pastor. Happy pastors is our... but then she realized that she evolved and moved to where when she made appointments, she couldn't help but be picturing how that church would receive this person. Would the church be delighted? Would they say, the bishop has listened? Would they be... And she didn't realize it, but it's kind of like happy churches had become the default, right? And then where she says is she kind of evolved into another phase, which was thinking about the people who are not yet in that church, but around that church. Will this person help us reach the people in that community who that church has not been reaching? Pastoral leadership. Okay. Oh my gosh, what time are we? We're still okay? No, we're not. We're starting. We're okay? Okay. We got another couple of hours. Number 5. Just kidding. So the world is flat. I mean, that's part of this. Beware of the hairball. Those are all organizational things. It's about clergy excellence. It's about congregational excellence. And then number 5 here, and there's only one more after this, so don't worry. We've got to have an unapologetic focus on fruitfulness. And by fruitfulness, that means an unapologetic focus on results, outcomes, all of that. Now, fruitfulness is not, a bishop's idea, church growth idea or something. It's as biblical as you can get. I mean, all the stories of sowers and seeds and harvests and vines and branches and and soils, and it just goes on and on. And virtually everywhere where fruitfulness is described, it has the effect of drawing our attention on what the outcome is rather than what the input is. And when an organization becomes unclear about its goals, its purpose, what happens is it starts to measure inputs instead of outputs. And this is who's especially vulnerable to this are nonprofit organizations. So by inputs, I mean all the resources that we apply to something. And by outputs, I mean all the results and outcomes and fruitfulness. And the best way I can illustrate this is I remember visiting a congregation one time. It was a large, wealthy congregation. And somehow in there, they're hosting me, and lay people are around, clergy around. And I said, "Tell me about your youth ministry." And one of the lay people stood forward and said, "Bishop, we think we've got the finest youth ministry, the best youth ministry in the state." And I said, "Well, tell me about it." And so he says, "We've got to show you." And so they took me down this hallway, and we walked into these 2 or 3 rooms that were just newly remodeled. They had these flat screen TVs on them and all kinds of neat furnishings and games and things like that. And they says, we redid this just for our youth, and these are our youth rooms here. And then we step outside, and there's 2 vans, new vans in the parking lot. And these 2 vans are our youth vans, and they were given by 2 of our members who wanted them exclusively for the use of our youth ministry. And not only that, we searched the state, and we think we found the best youth director in the state. And she started just a few weeks ago, and we think this is just going to be great. And not only that, now this was a wealthy congregation. We put like $30,000 in a discretionary fund that's available for our youth. Like I told you, Bishop, we think we've got the best youth ministry in the state. Now, have you noticed anything missing in that description? Well, tell me about your youth. Well, we've got about 8 or 10 that attend usually. Now, what is the fruit of youth ministry? How do you get a handle on fruitfulness about youth ministry? Number one, it is fair to talk about the number of people reached. And I would hope it's on your heart that there's a kind of inherent good to reaching 50 rather than 20 or 20 rather than 10. That's. But the other part of a youth ministry is what's the change that's going on in their hearts and minds because of their engagement with the spiritual life? Are they being taught, nurtured in a curiosity about the spiritual life? Are they learning about Jesus? Are they learning about making a difference in the world around them? Are they learning to pray? Are they learning to feel comfortable with the language of the interior life? I mean, all those things, right, are the fruit of the youth ministry. So it's 1, how many? 2, how are these youth going to be different because they are a part of this youth ministry? That's the fruit. Now, here's the thing. The rooms, the flat screen TVs, the vans, the number of youth sponsors, the amount of money in the budget, the youth director, all those are inputs. And none of them have anything to do with fruitfulness. This is going to be easy for me to say because I'm getting on a plane in a couple hours, but if it's not bearing fruit, stop doing it because we don't have time anymore. It is far more difficult and takes more energy usually to stop something than it does to start something. So that's not an easy prescription to say if it's not bearing fruit, stop doing it. But what it may take of pastoral leadership is feeding the new while starving the old. It's a matter of attention. How much attention do you give? And you've got to feed the new. You've got to feed what's fruitful. There isn't any element of your ministry that you should not be thinking of in terms of what's the real outcome and fruit of this ministry. And sometimes it's not what we think it is when we really get into it. I remember a church that had a weekend project where the members of the congregation, for 3 days, they'd volunteer Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and they'd go and they'd help with construction projects for homes that were that they worked with community agencies to identify. So they'd rebuild roofs and stuff like that. So it was mostly in poor areas of town. In the particular example I'm thinking of, this was a predominantly Anglo congregation, and the community where they'd go and they'd do these projects would be predominantly Hispanic. And they'd do about 5 or 6 of these on a 3-day project. So they'd have 60, 70, 80 people out in the field. They'd have 20 of them here and 10 of them there, and they'd work all through those 3 days. And so just picture this in your mind. I mean, what's the fruit of this ministry? I mean, you think, well, repaired roofs and, good relationships in the community and helping the poor. But picture what was going on. Picture 15 upper middle class folks arriving with Suburbans and surrounding a house. All of them Anglos, stepping out of their trucks with their Starbucks cups, looking at that house. Boy, Mom's never going to believe this. And 3 days of that, right? All the conversations. You've been on these work teams, haven't you? How do they live like that? What are they doing with a television? We're here helping them. They got a flat screen TV. What kind of priorities these people have? And they come and they go and they build, maybe somebody in that family, one of the teenagers, one of the young men says, can I help? I'm willing to help. I'll help you repaint. No, we're here to help you. You just sit right down. Okay? So this church was doing this ministry. This was an annual project. They do about 5 of these a year. And finally, it occurred to someone, why don't we see what the effect is? Why don't we? But it's going to be kind of hard because there's cultural barriers and income barriers and stuff. So what they did is they went to a local college and they contracted with Hispanic sociology students to go back and do and have a conversation with each of the homes that they had visited about 3 months or 6 months after they had been there. What do you suppose was the fruit of that ministry? Hard feelings of humiliation, embarrassment in front of my neighbors, wish it hadn't happened. Roof was fixed, but the relationships were damaged. Now, did that mean stop doing that project? No, it meant rethinking it. Rethink how the training goes. Rethink some of the protocols. Rethink what the desired outcomes are. Is this just about fixing roofs, or is this about relationships? Is this about the ministry of Christ? And how do these two represent? How will this change our behaviors? And so the church started learning its way to a different. So I don't think there's any ministry that you have that you can't kind of think about in terms of fruitfulness. What's the impact? Some things in ministry are measurable, and those we ought to measure. They're quantifiable, attendance, things like that. But there are a whole host of things in ministry that are not measurable, but it doesn't relieve us of the responsibility of focusing on fruitfulness. It's that those things that aren't measurable are describable. So describe the change that has happened. Describe what's gone on in somebody's life. I mean, that's as old as the church itself. That's the word of testimony. It's the word of witness. And but I think we've got to adopt an unapologetic focus on fruitfulness at all levels of the church. If it's not bearing fruit, stop doing it. And it's not just church fruit. It's not just how your congregation's doing. It's kingdom fruit. It's how is God working through your church to impact the community around you? How does what we do change people's lives, affect the mission field? And we've just got to be unapologetic in that. Okay, now, fifth one, I'm 6, thank you. I was checking you on that metrics measuring thing. I'm going to put maintain outward focus. focus, force future-oriented thinking. I'm going to tell what I think is a humorous story, but Bob, don't tell anybody I told this one because it's about the Council of Bishops. Sometime after Bishop Hayes and I became bishops is when the big storms hit, Katrina and I don't know if you realize it, but you know the response wasn't just all smooth and easy to that. The governmental response, but neither was the United Methodist response. There are a lot of little tensions going on that you may not even be aware of. One general board wanted to put up something on, AOL and CBS News and all those things as one of those 20 charities that would get. And another general agency was, no, we're not prepared to handle that. And then there was question about how do you make an appeal? Does a conference do this, or does the bishop do this, or does the general board do that? What's a bishop's appeal versus this gets into stuff that I can't even explain. And then there was who does what and who does the communications on this. There were people that were ready even then to do the thing, give $10 by just clicking on this. But, somebody has to pay the little 50-cent fee or something that goes with each one of those, and no one was willing to. And so the Methodist Church, like the federal government, kind of spun around there for a little bit, wondering, what do we do? And all that. About, I don't know, it would have been 6 months after it was when it was Council of Bishops meeting. And we all kind of knew that there was a little bit of this going on. And I was, new bishop, what do I know? After hearing a report about how things were going, I went to the microphone and said, I would like to suggest that maybe we have like a panel discussion that has the general secretary and maybe head of UMCOR and the bishops of the areas, Louisiana and Texas, and maybe UMCOM, and like just have a panel that just processes what did we learn from this, what are some of the places where so that next time, we're better able to do this in a more coordinated effort. I remember the president of the Council of Bishops says, thank you very much, Bishop Schnase. Are there any other questions? And I went and sat down, and it's like, am I invisible? Did I just disappear? No, I went and sat down, and Bishop Blake was sitting next to me. You know Bishop Blake. He taps me on the shoulders and he says, you just learned the difference between a reporting organization and a learning organization.